and welcome to the channel. If you're here for the first time, clearly the algorithm doesn't like you, but stick around, you might enjoy what you see. So this time around I've decided to do a couple of Tokusatsu movies. Now there'll be an explanation on the screen right now telling you what that is. They're both by the wonderful Toho studios, who made the best films in Japan for a very long time and gave us things like Gojira and a real big amount of movies with nightclub scenes in them for no good reason, apart from the fact that nightclub scenes in 1950s and 1960s Japanese movies are incredibly cool. So the two movies I've got for you, the first one is from 1958 and was made roughly the same time that Steve McQueen was running through supermarkets with a red blob following him. And it is the H-Man, directed by Inoshiro Honda, and it is a lot of fun. And the second one was also directed by Inoshiro Honda 5 years later in 1963, and of course it is Atragon. So leave it with me and we'll get this started. Now I've got a bone to pick with this movie in one sense, because I was originally going to watch the version that I have on this collection called Vintage Sci-Fi 6-movie collection. I'm not fond of the term sci-fi either, but here it is. And there is a version, I've got to put it over where you can see it. So there is a version of the H-Man on this one, but it is the wonderfully bad, well actually the atrociously bad, American Columbia Pictures version from the 1960s, which has dubbing. Now dubbing, yeah, fair enough, certain movies have got dubbing in them, but this has got the racist dubbing where everybody sounds like Joe Jitsu in the Dick Tracy cartoon series.
Suspects do not suspect, I suspect. Ha!
So about 5 minutes into watching it I went, no, this isn't good enough. I don't want to watch this anymore because I can't get past the racist accents that these white dubbing actors are putting on. So I found the original Japanese version, and that's what I'm going to be reviewing now. A lot of the information I've got from these movies comes from a really good book called Mushroom Clouds and Mushroom Men, The Fantastic Cinema of Inoshiro Honda by Peter H. Brothers, and that's what it looks like. So reference books have a lot of more information. A creaky chair. Reference books have a lot more information in them than IMDb or anything like that, or Wikipedia. So I went to the books and found out some interesting things about these two movies, and you really need that book. If you're interested in Tokusatsu movies or Inoshiro Honda, you really need to have that book. So let's get started with the H-Man. The Japanese title is much, much cooler than the English title. In Japanese, the movie is called The Beauty and the Liquid People. And I like that. I think it covers everything. We do have a beauty in this one, a woman called Chikako, played by Yumi Shirakawa. And she sings in a nightclub. Now, she comes in at a tangent into this movie, because at the start we get a bit of stock footage in the wrong aspect ratio of nuclear testing in Nevada, which is odd because they're actually talking in the movie about the Bikini Atoll. Nonetheless, you get that at the start. Then you get a guy who is basically a wheelman waiting for a friend to pick up some illegal drugs. So the guy's about to put the smuggled drugs into the boot of the car when he suddenly starts screaming and fires his gun. So the guy driving the car obviously takes off, and the drug dealer guy is hit by a cab. But when everybody gets out of the cab and starts looking, all they can find is his clothing. He's been totally dissolved and washed down a drain because it's raining, and also because the H-Man dissolved him. So the movie becomes a police procedural in the same way that the early 1950s giant ant movie Them is a police procedural. And I'm fine with that because I like watching cops in Japanese movies sitting on desks and chain smoking cigarettes. The cops are trying to find out where the guy went and why he ran away naked because they don't know he got dissolved. And they interview Chikako, and we get to see a whole bunch of one of my favourite things in Showa era Japanese movies, which is scenes set in nightclubs. Now, Chikako actually sings a couple of songs in this movie, and it's a bit unusual for this kind of Tokusatsu movie, which is called a kaijin movie because it's about human-sized monsters. But it's a bit unusual to see prolonged musical scenes in a movie like this. But Honda gives it to us. And the funny thing is that the character sings in English. Obviously it's been dubbed by an English singer. But the cool thing is, to get the songs, they actually went to the British Embassy in Tokyo and got somebody to write them English lyrics for a song. And they did. Nobody knows who that person is. Could have been a woman, could have been a man. But they just went to the British Embassy and went, hey, anybody want to write a song for a monster movie? And they went, yeah, sure, I'll write too. So that's what happened, which is hilariously funny. So, but the nightclub scenes are really cool. I like the sets of the nightclub. I like the weird dance sequences we get. And one of the dancing girls, unfortunately, gets eaten by the green slimy thing, which is sad because she was quite a good dancer. And then we get the cops chasing down the monsters, and there's more than one of them. And as the cops and a scientist who just happens to be a friend with one of the cops start investigating, they find out what happened and how it happened. The scientist's actually doing interesting work because he's in a lab where they're basically irradiating frogs, taking away any heat from the radiation, and the frogs turn into green slime. And we see a bit of that. I'm not sure whether any frogs were harmed during the making of the movie, but there are bits of it that kind of parallel some of the experiments that were done in the Ang Lee Hulk. So maybe the Ang Lee Hulk referenced this movie in a weird way. But anyway, leaving that aside, they find out there are a bunch of sailors who are on a ship in the Pacific Ocean who find an abandoned ship not long after the Bikini Atoll tests. And they board a ship which seems to be abandoned. They board it at night because it's creepier that way. And they find the H-Men. Eventually the ship kind of drifts into Tokyo Harbour, and that's how the H-Men get to Japan. They really well evoke the H-Men too. I've got a little bit of information about how they do the special effects in this, and there are a lot of effects. There are some travelling mats, there are some really kludgy looking effects, but they're all charming. The weird thing is that for all the effects work that's in this film, and all the effects work that draws attention to itself, I really like it. The monsters themselves were made out of gelatin and cellophane, and in some cases they had them wedged between two pieces of glass so they could move the glass apart and together and make them look like they were kind of breathing or pulsing a little bit. And it works quite well. You don't expect it to be totally on point, but I think that the use of special effects in this movie is really imaginative, as in fact was the case with a lot of Toho's work. And there are a lot of effect shots in this film. Surprising amounts of it. Some of it's just like pouring buckets full of gelatin under a doorway. But other times there are some really interesting effects where you can see them making a real effort to evoke these monsters and make them both slimy and terrifying. Even though there are some slow bits, and even though the lead actress, who is very, very beautiful, is not particularly gifted in the thespic arts, the movie works well. And I think there were a few scenes filmed around Odaiba, which is totally different now than it was 60 odd years ago. But I like this film. I like Honda's idea of blending monster movies with a police procedural. Throwing in the groovy gangster movie style nightclub scenes works well for me as well. And the Japanese version is quite longer than the American Columbia version. And from an aesthetic point of view, not having that stupid bloody dubbing really adds to the movie, and it gave me a much better feel than the 5 minutes of the Columbia Pictures version that I endured. So the H-Man's a high recommend from me. I may well go down a rabbit hole of Tokusatsu movies after watching these two. And I kind of like that era of Japanese cinema anyway. Kurosawa movies are great in that time, even the non-period ones, especially the non-period ones. And being somebody who loves Japan and wants to go back there one day, this movie hit all of the sweet spots for me. The second movie I've got for you is, in Japanese, Kate Gonkan, submarine warship, also known as Atragon, from 1963. Now this one's got a few parents to it. The first one, which is obviously an influence, was George Pal's Atlantis, the Lost Continent. There are some feels of that in this movie. And there were also some Japanese novels about World War II era submarine commanders. who wouldn't let the war be finished and continued to fight the war afterwards using next level submarines. And this movie's got parts of that in it. The story is very much a kiddie matinee kind of story of the Mu Empire, an undersea empire which once ruled much of the earth before it sank beneath the waves 12,000 years ago. It suddenly comes back and starts attacking various cities around the world. The secret agents that the Mu Empire have special powers. They're strong. They can heat up wrenches. They've just got next level powers, and they're threatening the whole world. They want to take over the whole world, make everybody slaves, and make everybody, one assumes, do their crazy undersea temple dance numbers as well. An American submarine goes after the submarines of Mu, but gets down to the depths where the Mu submarines go and gets crushed like a beer can. So the Japanese government and the authorities and the daughter of a missing Japanese submarine commander from World War II get some hints and get a little bit of information that there's a secret island base somewhere where this World War II era Japanese engineered genius submarine commander is building a submarine called Atragon, which will be able to take down the Mu Empire and save the world from being attacked. So one group goes out on a search for the island and the submarine commander, and they find him. Meanwhile, the Mu Empire is guarded by a giant kaiju called Manda, which is basically a snake with a dragon's head stuck on the end of it, which lives underwater. Now, Manda's got to be one of the worst Toho kaiju I've ever seen. It does not in any way, in any form, look realistic. The eyes are really, really bad in this one. But you've got to go with the flow of this kind of movie, and that's what you do. So the wonderful submarine Atragon, which is also capable of boring through the earth and flying. So it's kind of like an enormous supercar. Supercar. Goes up against the Mu Empire. They kidnap the Queen of Mu, and things proceed as you would expect them to in this kind of movie. And it's silly fun. It's not at all serious. It's got nothing realistic about it, and that's part of the charm of it. It's got some groovy wetsuits. It's got some really weird costume design for the people in the underground empire, which is a weird combination of modern and ancient. And the lovely thing is that when I was a kid, this was my Saturday matinee fare, this kind of movie. It was wild and weird. It was a lot of fun. It wore its freak flag on its sleeve. And the silliness and the underground empires and undersea empires, come to think of it, though it is technically underground as well, were just the sweet spot for me. And Japan put out a lot of this product in Western markets in the 1960s, and kids saw it. We saw things like Destroy All Monsters, and we saw Atragon, and we saw All Monster Attack and all of those films. I've actually done a whole video full of Godzilla movies, so you can go back and enjoy that one. But Atragon is fun. People have remade the model as well. The model work in this is not fantastic in close-up, but it works well in distance shots. But nonetheless, there are a lot of effect shots. There are a lot of miniatures, there are a lot of large sets, there are a lot of special effects shots. You can kind of forgive it if they don't quite get the windows on the submarine right. You've got to lean into these kind of movies and just go, yep, I will accept that because I'm having a good time. And this movie definitely gives you a good time. So that one too is a recommend from me, though. I think that the H-Man is a better film, and it also has better nightclub sequences because Atragon doesn't have any nightclub sequences. I've also got a hidden gem for you. So I've got a third movie I haven't told you about yet, and I'm going to talk about that right now. The hidden gem I've got for you is from 2017. It's a Canadian science fiction movie called Radius, and I liked it. I took a chance, and it delivers. It runs a tight 93 minutes, so it doesn't outstay the welcome of its premise, and it's a lot of fun. Now, it was directed by a couple of French Canadians called Caroline Labrèche and Steve Leonard, and it stars Diego Clattenhoff as a guy called Liam, and Charlotte Sullivan as a woman called Jane.
I've been looking for you.
No, don't come any closer, please!
Now, it's pretty much a two-hander though. There are a few other people in there. But the premise sold me on this movie. Basically, a guy wakes up after a car accident with total amnesia and slowly discovers that anybody that gets within a 25-yard radius of him dies. Any living mammal or bird, or basically any animal at all, including human beings, drops dead. Their eyes turn a glassy grey and they fall off the twig and onto the rainbow. So he's kind of shattered by this. So he goes back to his house, which is in the country. He has a landscaping business. And he starts trying to figure out what's happening. Then a woman turns up on his property and tells him that she was in the car accident with him. And she doesn't have a memory either. And she gets close to him and doesn't die. And Liam and Jane find out that when she's within that 25-yard radius of Liam, people don't die. Now, Liam's gone through a town before he got home, and everybody in the town died. He thought it was because of a virus or some kind of chemical agent. Turns out that's not the case. And so Liam and Jane, who become closer as the movie progresses, slowly try to find out what's happening. Meanwhile, the cops arrive, and things go really bad there. There's a scene where they go to get a MRI scan for Liam in a hospital, and the two of them are separated, and they've got to stay within a 25-meter radius, otherwise everyone in the hospital dies. So there's that kind of tension build up. They follow through on the premise really interestingly in this film, and there's a third act twist that's really good. I didn't pick it, but the movie builds to it nicely. It doesn't just throw the twist at you. And we find out who Jane really is, because she's been given the name Jane Doe by the people who found her, and what the real situation is. And it works. It's short, sharp, precise filmmaking. There are some effect shots. They've obviously got to get people's eyes to glaze over grey. And there are a couple of other effect shots in the film, but they're not effects heavy. And the acting really carries it. The two main actors really sell the premise, and that's an important thing in this kind of movie. And it's a nice little hidden gem for you to check out. So that's Radius from 2017. It's probably on streaming services somewhere, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding it. And it's a pretty solid recommend from me. I really liked it. I liked the fact that it didn't try to do more than it could with the premise, and it followed through nicely on the promises it made. So anyway, that's it this time around. Thank you very much for watching. As always, please consider liking and subscribing, leaving a comment, and let me know what you thought of these films, and whether you have that fondness for Tokusatsu movies of a certain era, because they are one of the comfort viewings for me. There are about 40 or 50 different genres of comfort viewing for me, but definitely, particularly Toho Tokusatsu movies are part of that. Anyway, look after yourselves, stay safe, watch some good Tokusatsu movies, watch some bad Tokusatsu movies, take a chance on a hidden gem, and I'll catch you next time.